So this time around, what we're going to talk about is the Bo Nickal versus Jamie Pickett fight, UFC 285. Let's dive into it. So, Bo Nickal, he's a fresh MMA guy. He has, was it 3 or 4 fights before this one? Undefeated. He had one fight in the Contender Series. And he was actually so inexperienced on Dana White's Contender Series that Dana White offered him the opportunity to have a second fight in the Contender Series before stepping into the octagon for an official match. And according to Bo Nickal, he was happy to do this. He wanted more experience. That way he had more under his belt before he was racking up things for his record, right? Makes sense. More experience under your belt, better record. That's thought process. It makes a lot of sense to me. I get it. I truly get that. It makes so much sense. And I'm not really going to say much about Jamie Pickett except for this. The guy is a proven vet. We know he's skilled. We know he's talented. We know what he can do. They didn't just throw Bo Nickal to a no-name. They didn't just throw him to somebody nobody's heard of. We know who Jamie Pickett is. He is a good fighter. Plain and simple. No doubts about it. He's a good fighter. It was a way to test where Bo Nickal's actually at. And not only that, but this fight was on the pay-per-view. It wasn't on the prelims. It wasn't in the early prelims. This fight was the opener for the pay-per-view card. So, it's very high visibility, very high optics. There's a lot of hype around it. There's a Bo Nickal hype train because of all the wrestling accolades. We understand this. Now, something that needs to be pointed out, I feel, and I don't know that people are going to point this out, but with how short this fight was, you didn't get much to see. But there was a moment on the feet when Bo Nickal had to jump in the air and swing his feet up and spin them around to the side of his body and bring them back down on the other side of Jamie Pickett. And people are just going to see that and think, oh, okay, so Bo Nickal just did this weird thing to shift position or something of this nature. And I guess if you want to look at it at a really surface level, sure. Great, good for you. That's a very not introspective or knowledgeable view of what took place there. What he did requires a very high level of athleticism and skill. Not a lot of people are going to pull that off. You don't see anybody do that because it's not something that's easy to do. It's not something that's necessary. It's not something that's required, but it made that transition much more simple for Bo Nickal. At the same time, he's doing this type of stuff in a debut. He's like, this is a risky move. You're in the air. You're in contact with your opponent and you're in the air. That's a high risk effort to take. That could be capitalized on and turned against you very easily. Not how it happened. In fact, they go to the ground and they struggle there for a little bit, but really not much. It's mostly just a struggle for trying to control where Bo's at on the ground in relation to Jamie Pickett. That way, Jamie Pickett can breathe longer because Bo Nickal's got an arm-in choke. Now, you hear these guys say all the time, he's got to get in the mount, he's got to get in the mount, he's got to get in the mount. And personally, I disagree. And the reason I disagree is from a judo background. I started doing judo when I was 6. I did it for a few years. We couldn't afford it anymore, so I wasn't doing it anymore. And then when I was older, I went back and I was doing it again for a while as a young adult. I was about 17, 18, and I did it for a few more years then. And I've done this numerous times in training in judo, and I've also done it just rolling around with my older brother, with my little brother who's a blue belt in jiu-jitsu and competes regularly. Well, not regularly anymore, but he was competing regularly for a while, and he's done pretty decently at it. He's won some gold medals at IBJJF, for example, and I've caught him with this a few times as well. So when you've got the arm in choke, so their arms like this, your head's over here, and your arms around their neck, trapping this arm here and choking them at the same time. I like to do this with the gable grip, and I like to tuck my elbow into their side. You've got the one arm around their neck and the other arm's free, doing this chicken wing shit. I like tucking that in right up into the ribs. It makes it nice and tight, and you can just use that as leverage to cinch it tighter. Now, what I learned in judo is where I disagree with this being in the mount to get this choke to really sink in. Highly disagree with this. I disagree with wanting to be next to him with your chest pushed into the ground as well, because what you do in judo, and I forget the Japanese name for this choke, but what they would call it in English where I was going was a pillow choke. And what you do is you maintain this choke in position, except for instead of maintaining your position on the ground chest down, you swing your legs away from your opponent so that you're basically sitting on your butt while you're choking them. So now their head is up like this. They're kind of forced into more of a sitting position, and it forces their neck deeper into the choke because you're now lifting them into it. And your goal is that you get your knee that's closer to their body under their head like a pillow, and you choke them. Now, when I've gotten this on people like my brothers and some second cousins and such friends, when we're rolling around and wrestling and whatever, they always tap before I actually get my body spun all the way around, because there's no more air and they're struggling to breathe to a point that it's over. I never see anybody do this in MMA, and I'm not entirely sure why. I'm not sure if there's a thought process that there's too much space that way, so your opponent's going to get out. And really, if your opponent gets out there, you're just both going to stand up. And you're in a better position to stand up or to scramble because you're already built up with half of a base for you to get up from, whereas your opponent's laying on their back and going to fall to the ground. Not far. It's only maybe 4 or 5 inches, 6 maybe. Basically, their head's on top of your leg, so whatever from your knee to the ground, that distance, they're going to fall that far, and they have to get up once they get out of it, if they get out of it. And I've never seen anybody do it. They're not able to trap your legs anymore. They're not able to manipulate your weight anymore. They're not able to strike you at all because you're above them. You're completely invulnerable to whatever they're trying to do, and all they can do is flail and try to free themselves. It's actually excellent to do, and that's why I'm just not sure why they do it. They don't do it. Maybe it's just not very common. Maybe it's because where I was going to school learning judo, because this school had been around before MMA was a thing, and they were teaching 10 different styles of martial arts and mixing them together already. So the thing is, maybe it's something that he had learned. His name was Frank Goody Jr. If you care to look him up, you do get the wrong guy when you look him up. When you look him up, you can find videos of him practicing judo. I'm terrible with names, but with one of the most well-known judoka to have ever existed. He's one of the founders of judo, and he's very well known, and you can actually watch Frank Goody Jr. in there with him doing some stuff, which you're probably going to find now that I've mentioned it, and then you're going to talk shit like, oh, he never throws this little old man. But in judo, as respect to your sensei, You don't throw them to the ground. You get them to the point that you could throw them, and you display the control to instead manipulate their weight around you and put them back on their feet rather than throwing them, because they're your teacher and you respect them. So if you look it up, that's what you're going to find. Point is, he's very skilled. He did a whole lot of things in his life. It's a different story. I just don't, and maybe it's something he picked up over there and brought back and said, nah, this is effective. And he did it, and it's not something that a lot of judo schools teach. It might just be something he picked up because of who he was learning from in Japan when he learned it and brought it back with him. So that's my critique to the way people criticize that choke all the time, that you need to be either in a just fully up on the mount or chest down next to him, pressed into the canvas. And I disagree. Elevate their head slightly, get it under your knee, and you have more leverage. Choke the shit out of him, put him to sleep. Now back to Bo Nickal. This guy not only won, he did this in under 3 minutes. I believe it was under 3 minutes. I believe it's 2 minutes and 54 seconds in. Maybe I'm reading this wrong right now because I didn't write down the time. I meant to and I didn't. But it might be the just over 3 minute mark in the fight, and there's 2 minutes 54 seconds left. But he called it. He predicted exactly how that was going to go. That he was going to get a finish in the first round, and that was how it was going to go for him. Now moving forward for Bo Nickal, little bit of a problem here. I believe he's 5-0 now, 4-0 maybe with this win. He's either 4-0 or 5-0 now with this win. I forget which. And the fact of the matter is, his debut being on a pay-per-view, not the prelims, not the early prelims, but on the pay-per-view itself, against somebody like Jamie Pickett, who's a well-established, well-known vet, he's going to get thrown to the wolves now. There's not another way for him to go. And I think he embraces this, and that's what he's looking forward to. But that's not what his coaches wanted. His coaches wanted to slow roll him into it so that he gets more experience under his belt, kind of like they do in boxing. And that's not going to be what he gets. He's going to get thrown to the wolves. And that was not the plan his team had. That's not the plan his coaches had. But that is definitely what's going to happen. And I'm excited to see how that works out for him, because the athleticism he displayed, the skill he displayed in doing that, amazing. Very promising. He's very young. You could argue that he's not even in his prime yet. He's so young, really, that he's still growing into his body, that his body is still growing and developing. That's not wrong. It's not wrong. And that's part of what makes it so exciting to see him in this position. Man, what a debut.